am Lori Troe. I am the president of our Salina Local League of Women Voters. And whenever we try to think of topics for what Lunch and Learn is going to be, it's like, what's something that's a hot button in our community? And one of the things that we keep talking about is how do we get all the what's going on in our community to everybody? I mean, I know people see Facebook, but not everybody has Facebook or Instagram or gets the paper or, pays attention to the radio. And it's like so many times I've heard people say, well, I didn't know that was going on. I would have went to that if I'd have known about it. Well, how did you know about it? And I'm like, well, I'm connected, social media wise. And it's just been kind of frustrating for trying to figure out what's the best way for us as the league to get things going on to people, or like election stuff or different things. And it's like, how do we do this? So I'm excited to have Charles Rankin from the Salina Journal and Leslie Eichelberry from Salina Post. And I forget which radio station you're with.
We have 99 KG, KIA,
Okay.
and 95 Prime.
Okay, to come, because that's where I see a lot of my news is Salina Post, or I get on Salina Journal every morning and just kind of get the headlines. And so I see what's going on. But it's just exciting to know that you guys are out there doing it. But how do we let other people, what other ways can we get all of our community? Because everybody is involved or needs to be aware of stuff. So I will start with Charles and just kind of give us a brief overview of your background and maybe what you do with the Salina Journal and what thoughts you might have.
I'm originally from Topeka. I grew up there, went to high school there, and I ended up graduating from Washburn University back in 2018. So I've been in Salina now for over 2 years. I started here in August of 2019. I got into the business because I really enjoyed researching things and learning about things and investigating things. And so that's kind of what brought me to it. And the more I learned about it, the more I really loved doing it. So here I'm pretty much right now the only local news reporter. We have a couple sports people, but I do most of the news heavy side of things. So I'm covering anything from, like last night I went to the city commission meeting to see they did their reorganization with their new members coming in. This morning I was on the YouTube video of the county commission, seeing what's going on there. With COVID going on, I pay attention to a lot of what's going on with the county health and emergency management. Special events that might be going on. I mean, we hear things about maybe there's a march happening downtown for some reason. I know in 2020 with the George Floyd protests, a lot of our coverage kind of looked at that. So we were even downtown during some of those protests or during some of the marches and rallies that were happening there. So I know for me, it's being the only person, it's difficult to get to everything, but I try to. And I know one thing that people always complain about with the Salina Journal is that it's paywalled. Like we do have stories that you have to either subscribe to or you have to figure out how to get to them. And I know a lot of people complain about it, but at the same time, I don't know how I'm going to get paid unless someone's paying for a subscription. And if you're getting so I know obviously people think that print journalism is dead, but it's just kind of moving away from print journalism and more to a digital first kind of aspect. So it's an interesting journey. I know I started at an interesting time with the 2018, 2020 elections and everything else, but it's been a fun journey so far. And I really like in Salina anyway, just all the connections that people have with each other, to where I know I can, if I have a question about a certain thing, I can find somebody that will know somebody else And I think that's a great thing about this community that's pretty large. I mean, we have 50,000 people in the county at least, but it still has a small town kind of feel, which I've liked. It's better than trying to do some of that stuff that I would have to do in Topeka. That's kind of all I have right now anyway. I'll take a look at these questions Angie posted, but.
Leslie, we'll give it to you.
My journey is similar to Charlie's, although I started way back in in grade school when I convinced my 5th grade teacher to let us do a class newspaper. Then in high school, I was on the newspaper staff at Central. And my senior year, the Salina Journal started a new program where they had a senior from each of the local high schools write a column once every 3 weeks. So I got to do that. So technically, I've been an employee of the Salina Journal as well, although not for very long. Got my undergrad out at Fort Hays, did journalism out there. My undergrad is in journalism, and started off at the Hays Daily. A couple of publishers who were not too pleasant to work for, so I thought, okay, my gift is to be able to write. I moved over to the PR side for a while, did PR at Emporia State, came back home. Now I'm doing journalism again for Salina Post. Like Charlie, I am the only local reporter, and that is trying at times because there are things that I want to cover and I know we need to, but I just can't. I work every day of the week. Last year, before the end of the year, and I ended up taking off every afternoon in December, and I still work during part of that. So, you know, there's really no downtime for me.
Do you get paid by the radio station?
Yes, get paid by Eagle Radio.
Eagle. Okay.
I get paid by Gannett, which is basically Gannett USA Today network. That is my official employer, but I'm a reporter for the Salina Journal.
The first question from Anne, and we'll start with Leslie. What is your biggest challenge in local reporting, which you both have kind of already answered, but.
Well, another part of that for me is just at least getting a heads up about something or some information about it. I spend a lot of time going through Facebook pages because people don't send out news releases anymore. Even like some government agencies, some law enforcement, the only way you get it is if you see it on Facebook. So that takes a lot of time, but just finding out about things, you know, I'll have people complain to me, well, how come you didn't cover blah, blah, blah? Well, nobody bothered to tell me about it. And, you know, with all I have to do, I'm going to not see, and maybe they didn't have it out on Facebook, but you're not always going to find out stuff. So if people could actually at least send me a heads up about it, and then I could get with them and say, here's what I need for a story, that would be very helpful.
And what's the best way to give you a heads up?
Lori's real good about hitting me up on Facebook. My email address is on our website, and that would probably be a good way to do that as well.
And for you, Charlie?
The same, like my email is on our website. I know when we hopefully get another reporter, we also just have a generic news@salina.com email, and that comes to me and it comes to everybody else that's in the easiest way to get a hold of us. And I would agree with Leslie on a lot of that. I know triage is kind of the word I think of when I figure out how to cover things, like what is important for the people here. Like during the election season, that's pretty much all I was trying to cover, was getting into who's up for election, what's going on with those people. But other things started happening during that. I mean, that's when the fire department issue was going on also. I'm trying to think, there was some other, COVID is always on top of things. And so it's hard to figure out where to go and what's the most important thing that the citizens need to know.
What do you know you're missing on? Charlie?
I think a lot of the just down to earth kind of stuff is hard to get in touch with. I know especially with COVID going on, like a lot of people aren't gathering places. We're not having big social things going on. Since I'm the only one, like I said, I have to kind of figure out what it is I need to get out. And with the community it's like I said, there's 50,000 people plus in the county. I know I would love to get out more into the county and get some of those stories. There's farmers out in the county that have things going on, and it's hard for me to get out there just because I have to focus on things in the city. So I think those are some of the things. I see the question Lene asked about like local stories, comments to the editor, some of those things. It's the local stories is hard to do a lot, and that's just because I mean I have to work on 2 or 3 stories a day, and not all of them are major things going on, so we're not necessarily going to put them on A1. But you know, we try to get in as much as we can, and it's hard to do with one person.
I know that you do write a lot of stories that don't get into the paper. The Salina Journal is trying to be a regional paper instead of a local one. They don't give space to all of your writing. How do they choose what to put in?
So, sorry about that. So most of what I write is probably in Salina Journal. If it's not, then it at least will be online. I know we have some online exclusive things. And a lot of it we have 3 papers that the company owns in Kansas. It's the Topeka Capital Journal, Hutch Daily, and Salina Journal. And so we kind of have pockets of coverage in areas. I know like one of the big stories I covered just last month was when Bob Dole died. Since I was basically the closest reporter to Russell, I was the one that went out and covered that. So a lot of the regional stuff is harder for me to do sometimes, but I have to do it. Like with Bob Dole, there was obviously, we had to cover that. He's like the greatest native Kansan of my generation before. So it's hard to say, no, I can't go out to Russell to cover this. I have something here to do in Salina. Luckily, there wasn't much going on in Salina that week, but except earthquakes. But regional stuff happens some. I think most of what and I don't always have a byline on things too. I mean, when there's press releases that come in, I'll just type them up really quick and not necessarily put my name on it, just because I didn't do a lot of research or interviews for some of those things. But I think most of what I write is fortunately in the paper or online, at least for people to access. The other thing kind of going along with that some, I know like our Facebook page and our Twitter account, some of the social media that we have, because we are part of a larger organization, national stories sometimes get pushed ahead of some of the local stories on those sites. So if there's something specific that I know, well, we need to get this out, I'll let our social media people who are based somewhere else know about it so they can get that out. But a lot of the more national things get on our Facebook and our Twitter accounts. So that's kind of it.
Leslie?
Very similar. I know there are more people feature type stories out there that I'd love to do. That's my favorite thing to write is features, but I just can't. Also would like to, and since Ann's on here, do more with the school board, but I just simply don't have time. Hoping to remedy that and work some things around so I can, because I think Salina needs to know about that. But yeah, it's just like Charlie, I try to figure out what, or prioritize what I need to be doing. The nice thing for me is we have a state editor who puts up all of the stateside stories for all the post sites in Kansas. So I don't have to do a lot of that unless he's on vacation, and then I get to do that as well. So yeah, that's pretty much.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like we have a legislative team in Topeka with Gannett, and so most of our coverage of the State House, I don't have to worry about, which is a great lift off of my shoulder. I mean, if
Exactly.
if one of the local legislators or one of the local representatives or senators is in town and talking about something, I'll go and cover that. But the larger issues that are happening in the State House, in the House, and in the Senate, I don't really have to pay attention to unless it really affects here on a local level. We are currently in the process of trying to get another local reporter. We had one last year and it didn't work out. So it's just kind of how he was a new graduate. It's just kind of how the business works sometimes. And he was not from Kansas, so I think he missed his family. And I don't blame him. He's not from here. It's not necessarily what he wanted to do or what he wanted to continue to do. So it's fine. But yeah, I just looked last week. We have a couple listings on, I think, LinkedIn, Indeed. So we have posts out there for openings. And I know I'm on the mass media page for Washburn because I graduated with the mass media degree. And so I went ahead and I was like, hey, if you guys want to join me out in Salina, here's a job opening. I'd love to have you. It's a great little town that people need to know about. And like Leslie said, one of the things I like doing is telling stories of people. And that's one of the things I mentioned in that post. It's like, there are a lot of great stories to tell here. We just don't have the people to tell those stories.
Yeah.
I've been feeling like it really affects our sense of ourselves that we don't hear very much and we get all this national and state news makes us feel like we're really not much here. And when you get lots of stories about us and what we're doing and people that you don't know that are doing things, then you get a bigger sense of what Salina is.
I have a question. I am curious about the relationship that you experience with, and I'm thinking particularly about the city, the county, and 305, the school or the school systems. I think, Charlie, you said that you don't get news releases anymore. You don't get connective kinds of things particularly. I'm interested in you describing what the relationship is now. And does there seem to be are those government entities concerned that there is not the representation from the media that there used to be? Are they relieved? Are they, do you know, see what I'm asking by that?
I can answer that a little bit just from my experience last night. So I was at the city meeting last night. Mayor Hodges, and one of the things she mentioned in that was, she was glad that the city was doing more to get news out themselves because we're not covering as much, which I agree with. We're not covering as much as they did 5 years ago or 10 years ago or even 3 years ago. And so I think on some levels, I think they're somewhat concerned about how much we're not covering, but at the same time, they're also helping in some ways. Like they now have a social media person that's working with them and getting things out for themselves. We get some press releases. I know we don't get everything just because they don't necessarily know everything that needs to be given out to people. And a lot of times, even if we get press releases, if it's something that frankly I don't see as that important, I might not write about it just because they put it on their Facebook page, or I know Leslie or somebody at KSAO will probably write it up and they'll get it out there. One of the things that we last year with Gannett steered more away from was like police blotter type coverage. I used to go to meetings every morning, and I think Leslie still does, with the sheriff and with the police department, and just get information from them about what happened the day before. And we're kind of steering away from those types of stories as far as we don't necessarily want to, we want to know large major crimes that happen, but we don't want to focus on the crimes. We want to focus on the stories that happen because of the crimes, or the larger, like if there's, a string of murders going on, obviously we're going to be covering that. But at the same time, like I'd rather focus on the jail that's getting built, because that deals with a lot of the criminal justice in the city and in the county. I'd rather look at those types of stories and see those and and focus more on those things so that people understand just the issue of justice and of crime in the city, as opposed to this particular person was arrested for this particular thing.
Leslie, do you have anything to comment on that?
Pretty much agree with what he said.
Have two. So my first one is just for Leslie, because I have to confess my ignorance. I don't really know what the Salina Post is, what its mandate is, what it's trying to be in Salina. Can you give us a quick, yeah, thanks.
Salina Post is the online news website, obviously website, for Eagle Radio in Salina. And Eagle Radio has stations all over the state. We have several up in Nebraska and one in Missouri. And all of those places have post sites. So we kind of have our own little network, but and Eagle Radio is employee owned. So technically, yes, we are locally owned because everybody who works here is an owner. When I started 3.5 years ago, the mandate from my boss then was, we want you to turn this into more of a journalistic news site, because in the past it started off as a bookings. You could go see the bookings and stuff like that. There wasn't a lot of other, I think we were getting like 9,000 page views a day. And I just looked at our numbers before I got on here, and yesterday we had 106,000 page views. So putting a lot more content up there, and people are looking at it. But just to try and make it more of a legitimate news website rather than the place you go to look at bookings is kind of what I've been working on.
But it's completely free to the viewer?
It is. Yes, we don't have paywalls.
So would you say that there are areas of overlap? It sounds like there are between the Salina Journal and the Salina Post. Or are there, like, if you were thinking of it as a Venn diagram, what would be the overlap and what would be the areas where one of you is concentrating and the other doesn't?
There are some things that overlap. I think one thing that Charlie does a better job on than I do, just because of time, is I don't have time to go sit at meetings and cover them, and he does.
Mm.
So you get that perspective. What I try to do is at least ahead of time here's what's coming up in the meeting, the commission meeting tomorrow or whatever. So to let people know that this is happening in case they want to, listen in or show up or whatever. I try to, on the major stuff, pick that up afterwards too, but oftentimes I can't. Because in addition to all the other stuff I told you that I do, I'm the person who puts the stuff up on our website, on the local side and on the sports. So that takes a little bit more time too.
I would say there is some overlap. I mean, obviously we get the same press releases more than likely, maybe a few differences here and there. So a lot of times some of those will get up around the same time. And I think there's a place for a thing like the Post. If people want a quick, not breaking news, but breaking news, yes, but at the same time, just a quick, hey, this is what's happening or what did happen. It's a great place to go. And one reason is because there's no paywall. I think one thing that, like she mentioned, I'm at most meetings, or at least I'm watching meetings from home if I'm not at them. And I think I'm probably better suited for in-depth type coverage of things. We have what are called weekenders. So we try to get pretty large feature, big, lots of copy stories for the weekend that we try to get locally. And so I think having more of that kind of in-depth, long-form storytelling is where probably a place like the Journal and some other organizations probably thrive more so than some of the other local organizations.
Do you know how many subscribers the Journal has, Charlie?
I don't know offhand. I could probably look it up. I know our print subscriptions are obviously down, but we have the interesting thing about the pandemic, nationwide, worldwide, online subscriptions of print media went up. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it went up pretty high. And I know we're getting more online subscribers because that's just how people consume media now. I know certain stories get better coverage than others.
I remember back in the day where there was a lot of local people writing comments, letter to the editor, and it would be on the editor's page. I don't see that so much anymore, and I really miss that, because that's local people's thoughts, opinions, and that makes it more local. I'm wondering if that was changed because of a higher up Gannett decision, or is that something local that our paper here has decided. And the other thing is, I've been taking the printed paper for 40 plus years, and I don't want to let go of it, even though it's so small now. It takes me 10 minutes to look through it, I think. And sometimes the mail person, are there any guidelines as to when the paper is supposed to be delivered? I know that used to be that way, but it's not that way anymore so much.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
I'll try to answer the second question first, just because it's not funnier, but it's one that people always ask me about. I know we used to have guidelines. If it's not there by 7:30, let us know. I don't know if that's still our guideline or not. I don't deal with circulation, and so a lot of times if people ask me those questions, I forward them to our circ department, just because they're the ones that are in charge of that. And as to the first question about more local editorials or more local comments on different things, that's kind of been a Gannett type of thing. So we do a statewide editorial page every weekend. We used to do an editorial page every day that used to be local, then it moved statewide. But now we've shifted that to, I think it's on Saturday or Sunday. And if people submit letters to us, then we'll send them out to the statewide team, and they'll look through those. I know we had, when Bob Dole came through, I think it was his former press secretary sent us a letter just thanking the Salina community for showing up out at the airport when the body was brought in. So I sent that to my editor and said, hey, can we get this in the paper? And it was in the paper, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, in the statewide section. And we do have some local columns. I know Joe McKenzie writes something every month. We'll have that this weekend. And so he, just kind of slice of life type of stories that are, or slice of life kind of things that are fun to read. And that's one thing with a smaller newsroom, it's hard to do some of those. And I can do opinion type things, but I'd rather focus on the news side and let other people deal with the opinion side, because that helps me maintain my own integrity of things.
Leslie, is there a spot on Salina Post where people could send you letters to letters like that?
Yes,
Okay.
we do have that.
Okay. I read the Salina Post every day, but I guess I hadn't noticed that part.
Well, we don't get too many. We got a few right before the election, that kind of thing, but we don't. And I think it's probably because people don't realize they can.
How do you send it?
We do accept them.
Yeah, our website, it's like down at the bottom of the page, so you have to kind of look for it unless you're mailing it to us, which I'm not in the office most of the time anyway, so I don't always check the mail.
One of the things that I miss a lot in the Journal, and maybe it is still available on Salina Post, I don't know, is the upcoming events. The ability to see what is going to be going on and to get there. Is there any way that we can encourage the powers that be to do that again for us?
You could encourage it. I can't speak for the company. Well, I shouldn't speak for the company on whether that encouragement will be received. I know online we do have an events section, and it's mostly user generated. So if you have something going on, then you can put it in yourself.
For upcoming events?
Yes, it's hard to find again. And for bigger things, I try to get stories out about some of the larger things. I know we had a lifestyle person who ended up leaving during the pandemic, and that was a lot of it was just because things were getting canceled, and so there was not necessarily a reason to have a calendar, because we used to have like a look ahead calendar to see, hey, here's the events going on this week. And with the pandemic, that kind of lowered the readership of those because events weren't happening, and I think the company kind of understood this isn't necessarily on a macro level what people are interested in. I know on a local level, people are definitely interested in those things. I think like Leslie mentioned before, a lot of the event stuff I do, or a lot of the event coverage I do, I find on Facebook. I know during holiday season, most of I had like a short story about here's what's happening for the holiday week. And most of that I got from Facebook, just because that's the easiest way for us to find it even. And obviously some people aren't on Facebook, some people don't like getting online, so it's harder for them to know what's going on. Yeah. Which is unfortunate, but I can't do much about it, I'm sorry.
We don't necessarily have a calendar of events, but when I know about events coming up, even if I do just a little short story, if it's something, like the people registering for scholarships or something, or this is coming up down the road and there are multiple events, we have a section for announcements, and I'll drop it in there as well. So after it cycles through the local side of posts, then it sits there until it's over with. It sits in the announcements section until it's over with.
So again, we just send that to your email at the website.
Okay, Lee, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, I have just a quick question. Charlie used the term newsroom and office, and it got me. So do you guys actually have a physical location?
We do. We have a office. We moved from the 4th Street building during the pandemic, and we are now located at the Board of Trade building down on Iron. But most of us aren't in the office. When the pandemic hit, we were working from home, and I actually like working from home. I don't mind not being in the office. If we had a large newsroom with 50 people, then it would be great to have that camaraderie and just have those people around. But at the same time, I can contact most of my fellow news people through Zoom or through some other means if I really need information. And I know like we have meetings every morning to do planning for what's happening the next day. That's a statewide thing. We have a weekly meeting with just Salina people on Mondays. So we still have those times where we're meeting together. It's just not in a physical space. Staff, there is me. There are 2 sports reporters. We have a few freelance people that do some photography and a little bit of writing, but not much writing. And then we have a photographer that's in Hutch who will come up for larger events to do some of it. Like she came out for Bob Dole. She comes up for certain things. But most of the time we're taking our own photos. So there's right now news side, there's 3 of us here locally. There should be 4 coming up soon, hopefully. And then we'll have a regional person that'll hopefully cover kind of Salina and Hutch, kind of because we're both in the same kind of central Kansas region. So I don't know where they might be located, but I know we're looking at trying to get another local person to kind of have a local type regional editor for those 2.
Okay. And you, Leslie, do you have an office?
I actually do. But I have, up until this No, up until December, I was working from home as well, just because of the pandemic. I'm back in the office now, and it's at the Eagle Radio Studios on South Ohio.
Thank you.
If I've got an internet connection and a telephone, I'm good.
Yeah, that's how it is for me too. Like although when the windstorm hit back
Mhm.
about a month ago, my power at my house went out. So I was like, oh, I'll go up to the office. Well, the power was out there too. So I had to kind of struggle to go find somewhere to work. But I mean, that would have happened anyway because the power was out at the office. So there's obviously struggles when you're working from home and when you're doing things solely online and solely with the use of electricity. But there's not much we can do when nature strikes.
Right.
I went out and took a lot of photos of damage that day for sure.
May I ask, Lene, may I go ahead and ask a question? I'm going to have to leave. So I am curious about, if there's one thing I've heard these last several years, especially, it has to do with the importance of local news, and that so many local papers, so many local news access is being bought up and not becoming centralized rather than decentralized. And I am curious as far as, just what your opinions are on that. And of course, then I think of I always look at things with 100 years of background, just because of being around for a long time, and how when you're younger, how you see that and how you interpret that. And I am curious with both Eagle and Gannett, because they certainly use words like local. But when you're the only one here, Charlie or Leslie, that is obviously like trying to clean a carpet with a toothpick. And so how do you kind of, what do you hear is your sort of command, your operative, what's the value of the people that you work for in terms of local? That's kind of a big question, but it's
Well, I think for Eagle, sorry, Charlie.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Local is very important. And, I lobby constantly to get more help so we can cover more local. We're kind of moving that way, but nothing official yet. So sure would be nice though. But yeah, they do value local. And like I said, we are all owners of the company. So we're locally owned. But Eagle wants to have a presence in each of the communities that it has stations and a post site. We recently contributed money to Housing Development Group, $50,000. Is that right? That's right. To help out with renovating houses because there's a need for housing in Salina. So Eagle is trying to do some things like that to be a part of the community, and each community that it's in is important to it.
And I'm talking news too. I mean, that relationship of the check and balance.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, in other words, it's important to have a presence.
Right.
But when I think of news and journalism and like that, I think of a really important check on the community, the government,
right.
That kind of,
Right.
I'm okay with a little friction.
Yeah, I think there is that, and it would be a whole lot easier to do if we had more staff.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're pushing that direction, but
And I know, like I said, we're looking at hiring another person, and those types of things will hopefully change when we get another person hired. I know with Gannett, local coverage a lot of times stems from national coverage, if that makes sense. So we might have, so like last year with the pandemic, we had kind of a, hey, the world is opening up a little bit more. And so we had national stories that were coming in from USA Today writers, but then we would try to look at a local side of it. So they were talking about, hey, this is the food business, or the grocery business is finding different ways to do things. What are you looking at? So I went out to Smoky River Meats and talked with them. So I think, and I know you mentioned kind of the younger audience. I went to school, I finished school in 2018, so I understand the world of news, and I had to learn it pretty quick throughout that. And even since then, it's changed. I mean, I was in school during the 2016 election, so I learned a lot of how news changed throughout that time. And just, I mean, like my school news, my Washburn's newspaper is now online only, just because that was what the students there drove, because they weren't picking up a physical newspaper and reading it. So I understand it a little bit. But I think we try to do local as much as possible. Like, I think one of the things that is harder to do with a shorter staff, like Leslie mentioned, is doing that kind of, like the fire department story. KWCH broke that, and they're out of Wichita, and I didn't know anything about that until they broke that story. And a lot of that is just because, you know, I have other things I have to look at, or things that I wanted to look at the time. And then when that broke, it was harder for us to do more in-depth coverage because another organization had kind of scooped it. And so it's a little difficult, but we still have some processes in place. I mean, I know every once in a while we'll file open records requests for certain things. And that is some of that watchdog type coverage that we really need locally. I know there's not a lot of controversy happening in Salina with local government. Well, there might be now that we have a new commission coming in. I don't know. But there's not a lot that we see right now, but with more in depth and more researching, it's probably easier, and it'll be better to try to find some of those things.
You know, I love sports. I grew up with that, and I used to do a number of them. But I've always been curious that in terms of the paper, the sports gets really, really good coverage, even local, and of course the other state and K-State, KU, all that gets coverage, even though some days it's maybe 2 days late or something. But I'm curious, is it a staffing issue? Is there more local sportsmen to do the more local sports? That's well covered, in my opinion.
So one thing that is pretty big with local news is Prep Sports drives a lot of local news. Most of our page views are going to be coming from local sports. So the company doesn't necessarily focus on sports coverage, but a lot of the resources that they have might go towards some of that, just because it's a major thing. Staffing is definitely a thing here. If we had when we get another news person, obviously we'll have more news stories. But another thing with sports is, because we're somewhat regionalized, like we have a reporter here in Salina that's covering K-State for most of the state, just because he's the closest person to it. And with prep coverage, with high school coverage, we just have good sports reporters, but a lot of sports is going on locally. And the school district is in the athletic or activities directors at the schools are very good at getting information out to people. Whereas the local government isn't necessarily that great about getting some things out. And so I think some of that has to do with just how much sports is going on, how much people look at sports. When you think of local newspapers, a lot of people, one of the first things they think about is sports coverage, just because, I mean, you're not going to have CNN going and covering your local high school tournament here in Salina. You're going to have your local newspaper doing it.
Now, doesn't Eagle have KINA, Leslie?
It does.
910?
It does.
And to me, KINA is kind of frightening. It was full of drastic conspiracy theorist commentators or, you know, personalities nationally. And I mean, last fall, it was announced on KINA that I was making death threats against one of the write-in candidates. And I want
Oh,
to
wow.
say here that I did not make any death threats.
Uh-huh.
But somehow they announced that on the radio. And so it makes me worry that Salina Post would have the same slant as much of that radio.
Have you
broadcast.
noticed that on Salina Post though?
I have not, and I don't want but the connection between KINA and Salina Post is sort of worrisome to me.
Well, the only connection is we're both owned by the same company.
Okay, just that, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you are trying to put out reliable information.
Who
The
is
other-
that?
Go ahead, what?
Who is the company that owns?
Eagle Communication?
Eagle owns all of that, KSAL, KINA.
No. We don't own KSAL or any of those.
That's a different one.
SKG, Prime Radio, and Salina Post.
What was
Okay.
the first one you said, Leslie? K,
KSKG,
okay. And KSAL is owned by, I mean, it changed hands a number of times. I forget what it is.
Meridian now.
yeah,
Meridian
I
Media?
believe it's Meridian.
Yeah.
And
Do
then-
they have a local reporter or a local news
They
They have
have
a
a couple of
few,
news
yeah.
people, actually.
here?
Todd Pittenger.
Yeah, Todd
Todd
is the
Pittenger.
news director, and then he covers some things. Jeff Garrettson covers a few things, and then they have another.
Sam. I
Yeah,
can't think of
Sam.
Sam's
I
last
can't
name.
think of his
Sam does
TV
news
or
and
so-
sports.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And the other thing I was thinking about, we just about 2 years ago, maybe, I suppose it was 3 years ago now, we had a lunch and learn about local news in general, and we had Mike Strand giving a presentation on the way local papers in Kansas had been gradually bought up by all the same companies. And he had a story, which I can't tell you where it was, but it was a small town in California that was like the size of Salina, that they lost all their local reporters, and the city commission just kept voting in raises for the city manager, and they kept getting higher and higher until and other things, I'm not quite sure, but no one was reporting on it. And finally the city ended up going bankrupt because they had done all these things and no one noticed. And so I want to encourage you both to pay attention and don't let us get into some situation like that. I want to say that I'm sure the school board would never do that.
Who is involved in that new news thing, 311? Do you know who? What is that about?
There are two young guys. They have kids, and one of them had to be out of town to go to his kid's 7th grade ball game in Topeka or something today. I can't remember their names. Do either of you guys, Charlie or Leslie, do you know their names?
Josh
Barnhart,
and I don't know
who
the other.
used to have my job here about 10 years ago.
Oh.
And Matt Moody.
Matt Moody, that's right.
Yeah, he's the one who started Salina Post years ago. And then Eagle bought it from him.
Huh.
Josh Barnhart and Matt Mooney?
Moody with a D.
Oh, Moody. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we tried to get them for today's program, but The one was out of town and the other one, I don't know. I don't know if he got back with Lori, but it was kind of short notice because it was hard to figure out who they were. So we knew that Kim Marias does a lot of photography for them. And so she finally found out their names. Everything's signed George.
Did you say that yours has a local, what's happening coming up?
We don't have a calendar as such, but when I get information about events, I'll write up a little story, and I'll also then, more often than not, drop it in our announcement section, which is also on the front page. So once the story cycles through the local column, it's still sitting on the announcement section until it happens.
One of the big things that we're still doing, that we've been doing for years, is we have what's called the scene page. So it's basically kind of local arts and entertainment. And we put in movie showtimes and what else is it? What's new at the library, things like that. But as you know, as the community theater has events coming on, we'll try to cover that as much as possible. It's harder to do now with just me. But we try to get those types of, here's what's coming up in entertainment locally.
We're dwindling here, so I think we probably need to sign off. And thank you very much for being here, both of you. And we hope that many people will view it afterwards too. So thank you and see you next time.